Professor Lakshma Watawala, founder and president of CPM Sri Lanka, Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, chairman of the committee, all governing council and advisory council members of CPM Sri Lanka, my friend, Mr. Atula Edrisinghe, trustee of Justica Trust and past president of Justica, all staff of CPM, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you all. I'm indeed honored to be standing here on this very important occasion to not only just to share my views of how we see this strategic resurgence, but also I'm here more of a learning mode to learn from some of the best managers that this country has. I am standing here because of Professor Lakshma Watawala and also Mr. Atula Edrisinghe. But I was thinking why I am asked to speak here. And I think it relates to the topic of this whole conference, strategic resurgence, because I think our development after the Meiji Restoration in the end of the 19th century, and also after World War II, our resurgence after that marks a kind of historical example of what people can do to overcome challenging times. But at the same time, as Professor Watawala mentioned, last evening, my ambassador was invited as a keynote speaker. And basically, I think what he explained was, especially in the context of post-World War II, how Japanese resurgence occurred and what kind of implications that has. So I don't want to duplicate and to waste your time in re-uttering what he mentioned. So today, rather, I'd like to focus more on, since we are gathering here in Sri Lanka, the current context of Sri Lanka, but also, I think if we talk about strategic resurgence, I think we have to bear in mind the current global and also contemporary perspectives. So first like to start from the context of Sri Lanka. And when we talk about the strategic resurgence, I think we have to start from the economy. And well, I arrived in Sri Lanka in September of 2021. And at that time, it was COVID lockdown. And then I think 2 months later, my ambassador arrived. And he was very fortunate. The moment he arrived, the COVID restriction was, curfew was raised, so he could move around. But then, so I was relieved that he arrived. And then I started looking into the facts and figures of the economy, and I was struck by the foreign currency reserve very drastically going down. So by the end of 2021, I was kind of more than sure that this country will have a very turbulent 2022. And I was asking the people in the government at that time who had knowledge and was responsible in dealing with those things. But at that time, the response was, well, we have a homegrown solution and everything will be all right. I think what we witnessed after that is that it wasn't all right. Well, I think a professor alluded upon management mistakes. I'm not sure how that happened. But in any case, this country was in a tough position, especially that it had to declare default in May, April to May of 2022. So then, as for Japan, how we were approaching this issue is that just as Professor Watawala mentioned, when Japan was in the deepest of troubles right after World War II, especially on the occasion of the San Francisco Peace Conference, then Finance Minister, Honorable J.R. Jayawardeneh made a speech which was very much in favor of welcoming back Japan into the world order in a very favorable way. And I think, yes, as Professor mentioned, we are very thankful of that. So when we were in deep trouble, Sri Lanka stood next to us. So we will stand firmly next to Sri Lanka to do whatever is possible in this situation. Then what we started to do was, number one is, of course, in that kind of situation, the only remedy that one can take is to have the IMF pills. You have to swallow it. So then, well, the IMF team was approaching Sri Lanka end of 2021. And since then, we have been talking to them very closely. Through those engagements, what we found out was that IMF was very much willing to support Sri Lanka, overcome whatever difficulties. And sometimes people demonize IMF. And I read a lot of the Sri Lankan newspapers, and sometimes they are very unpopular. But from everything that I know, they are very much open-minded. And also, I kind of would explain them as like a doctor, because Sri Lanka as a patient became very ill, extremely ill. So if you become ill, firstly you have to sleep well, and you have to take certain pills, and you have to maybe eat less, carbs and sugar, eat more vegetables, exercise more. And basically what the IMF says is exactly that. So since both foreign currency dried out, also the budget deficit was huge. So you have to increase the revenue, and then the cut government expenditures. And basically that's what they are telling. So but at the end of the day, how to do that is very much up to the Sri Lankan government and the people of Sri Lanka. So basically IMF is there it's like a doctor, tell you what you have to do. And I think in everyday life, we run our own families. I think that's exactly what you do. You make sure that you have enough earnings, and the expenditure, you will always bear in mind how much you are earning. So, so the same thing applies to a country. And I think IMF is there to help you, especially when you're in a tough situation. So we were very much reaching out to IMF and also coordinating with them very closely, and to somehow overcome the situation. And also I think in the context of Sri Lanka, if a middle-income country fails and defaults and really starts sinking, it could have started a kind of domino effect, because there are many other middle-income countries which under very harsh situation during the past few years are also in difficult situation. So I think the whole international community was determined to help Sri Lanka. And then the other difficult part is the debt restructuring, because at the end of the day, this economic crisis was caused because there wasn't enough foreign currency in either finance or central bank. So at the very end, what I heard, I think, from the people in the government knowledgeable about this, April 2022, I think at a certain point, they only had around $10 million cash available to settle the needs. $10 million, even one company might have that amount of cash. So a sovereign state and the government only had that liquidity in April of 2022. So you can see how serious it was. So the government chose to do a soft landing, so declare a default and start restructuring. So in order to do that, theoretically, there are several ways to do it. And the first thing that occurred to our mind was G20, because the G20 has a common framework, and it is applied to the least developed countries. So the creditors will have a certain way to treat debt issue for the least developed countries. But Sri Lanka, since is a middle-income country, has already kind of graduated from that least developed country status. That cannot be applied. So one thing was to expand the G20 common framework to include countries like Sri Lanka. But then unfortunately, spring of 2022, as we were thinking about that, the war in Ukraine started. So the whole G20 process was struggling to keep unity. So there was no room to delve into expanding the G20 common framework. So that didn't work out. Then logically, the other option would be to work with the fellow creditors so that we can treat Sri Lankan debt and come out with a solution in the swiftest way possible. And that was the course we chose. In September of that year, after the current president became president, he flew to Japan in September, and he met our prime minister. And basically what he asked us was to help Sri Lanka on this debt restructuring. And then the following day, he flew to Manila, where there was the Asian Development Bank annual meeting. And our finance minister, Mr. Suzuki, was in Manila. So President flew to Manila, and in his capacity as a finance minister, met our finance minister and asked the same thing. So that kind of triggered us starting to really work on this. And what we did was we established this official creditors committee And basically all the government creditors are there. But the major creditor for Sri Lanka is China. So we invited them as observers. Ideally, if they had joined, that would have been okay. But having them as observers and kind of sharing our information to them, we were hoping that as the major creditor, they can also take a constructive role and have no suspicion on what others like us was thinking. So that, I think, we were kind of successful because last year, 2023, towards the end of November, we were able to come to an agreement in principle on the treatment of our government credit, debt that Sri Lanka owes to us, and we agreed on the treatment. So, in a sense, I think this is like a Guinness Book of Record swiftness in achieving this. And I think behind that scene, so IMF was working hard, the creditors were working hard, but also I think Sri Lankan government did its part. So this process is absolutely important. And if we talk about the strategic resurgence, I think the economy, keep the economy going upwards is the only way to achieve that in this current context of Sri Lanka. And for that, I think, I've been observing this whole process past 2 years. I think it's fair to say that unfortunately at this moment there's no other option apart from taking this IMF reforms and also working on the debt restructuring. Hopefully, the commercial creditor side of this debt restructuring will also, the negotiations are going on from what we know, and hopefully sooner rather than later, there will be agreement on the treatment. Then that will lead to the successful conclusion of the debt restructuring process. And after the debt restructuring process is concluded, then sovereign ratings will come up, and then access to finance for the companies that you all work for or are running will have access to that. So to make this process actually bear fruit is, I think, the basis of future development of this country. So reality, I mean, looking at all the realities, whatever the political discourse is, I think the economic reality is, as I mentioned. So hopefully, this year is a very important year, it seems, and people are talking that there might be some big elections. And at the end of the day, the people of Sri Lanka will decide on who will be governing this country. But as an outsider and as a person who has been observing this whole process of Sri Lanka coming back on the economic side, hopefully whomever will be in power will continue certain basic features of this IMF program and also the debt restructuring. And I am very hopeful and confident that the people would make such choice. Then, since there are many corporate executives and managers here, we have to touch upon the companies. And as Professor Watawala mentioned, there are listed companies, mainly big companies, and also I think there are non-listed companies and many SMEs. I think starting from the listed companies, both the Tokyo Stock Exchange recently, it hit a record height. And, first time in about 30 years. Here, Colombo Stock Exchange is also doing quite well. So I think the big companies in general, in this very tough situation, are doing, very quite well. But at the same time, I think the SMEs, and in Japan, in fact, the SMEs account to more than 99% of the number of companies. And here in Sri Lanka, I hear that it's around 75%. So this sector, for the resurgence of the economy, you need a healthy SME sector. That applies both in Japan but also here in Sri Lanka. Then how exactly to achieve that is a tough issue. I think Professor Watawala just alluded upon, like interest rates, which of course, I mean, in general it's coming down. So hopefully that will give the whole corporate sector much ease in doing business, but especially how to make sure that the SMEs are kept afloat. And because at the end of the day, they absorb nearly half of the employment in this country. And once they are in trouble, it means there's instability in the society. So that's why it has to be dealt with in a good way. And well, at least in Japan, what we tried to do was we were kind of trying to assist, especially those SMEs who are taking a sustainable pathway, to kind of lend favorably or to like kind of encourage local banks and financial institutions to, how do you call it, to have very close communication. Because those companies would have a better chance to thrive in the future if their sustainable business would continue. So we try to give incentive by working closely with the local government and local financial institutions to approach SMEs. And as I mentioned, it accounts to 99% of our companies in Japan, so that's quite a lot, so that's why we're doing it. Hopefully, I think Sri Lanka will come up with some kind of solution on that. And when I meet with the government officials, that's one topic that I always raise and seek their views and kind of urge and encourage to take some steps. Then also on the big companies, so I think this global trend for sustainable finance, I think is irreversible. And this ESG investing or impact investing, I think this has already become a huge trend. And well, in fact, it will, if you do it wisely, you can unlock trillions of dollars of money to your respective industries or to your company, especially through institutional investors putting their money, especially in the stock market. That's one typical way to do it. Then you can thrive. So I think for the big companies to utilize whatever possible means to try to make use of that sustainable financing movement that is happening, I think is absolutely important. So I think for the corporate sector, to summarize, I think sustainability would be the key word, and that will ensure the resurgence and also the sustainability of whatever business model that will continue. And then another thing, well, so on management skills, I think everyone here as chartered professional managers know even more than I do about how to approach this. And yesterday, I think my ambassador also mentioned about like Kaizen or 5S. And Mr. Atura Edrisinghe was chairing Justeka, which is championing, introducing Japanese management methods in the context of Sri Lanka. And I have also visited several factories that are actually applying that. So there's a lot of experience on that front, and Japan is committed to continue working on that front. But also, I think if we talk about strategic resurgence, we need a strategic management way of thinking. And so, well, I work for the government, so it's not totally identical in your context. But one thing that I try to do on this strategic management or strategic thinking, whatever you call it, is to whatever task you have at hand, I don't start from what we have been doing up to now or what resources I have at hand. I always think about what is the ideal situation, and don't think about what resources you have at hand at this moment. The best thing, what would it be? So to give an example, in the headquarters, when I was in charge of setting the agendas for the G20 Osaka summit back in 2019 and working for Prime Minister Abe, one thing, well, he was very interested in education, and I was in charge of the education agenda. So then, we, for the Japanese people to understand the importance of the agenda, it's better to have someone, a person. So then the people will, through that person, start to think about what the agenda means. And then at that time, well, my staff, I was asking, who would be, possible people, and they started listing. But they're okay, but they're like, some Japanese people or whatever. But then at the end, we chose to go for Malala, who is, she got the Nobel Prize. And at that time, she was doing her graduate studies at Oxford, but we had no contact of her whatsoever. But then, so somehow, we, got some kind of a contact, and then I just flew to London And at first, she was supposed to be there, but then because she had classes at Oxford, she had some of her staff there. And I was kind of explaining, the importance of this G20 summit in Japan, and that we will put education as one of the cornerstones, because Japan's development strategy, in fact, I think the secret of it is that we have always been investing in human capital, and most typically through education and health. And the education part, so these two we will move forward and also highlight during the whole summit process. And especially education, well, health we are doing quite a lot. We are able to mobilize a lot of money. But the education in any country takes too much time, so politicians would not be too interested. So to get the resources is much more difficult for education. So thus, we need to highlight this, and we think that Malala is the best person to promote that. Well, the staff said, okay, okay. And then a couple of months later, I think during the UN General Assembly time, at that time also Malala was not able to come because she was doing her whatever at Oxford. But then the staff approached me in New York and said, okay, so Malala is basically, interested, but for her to come on board, she has certain things that she would like for us to take into consideration. So then we started talking, and then we were able to have her in Japan next spring as a featured guest for World Conference for Women. And so we were inviting all the women influencers, and as one of them, we invited her. And then our Prime Minister had a good chat with her, and then it materialized in agreeing upon a outcome document at the summit on human capital investment focusing on education. So this is just one example, but if you start from what you have, the impact will be limited. But if you think of what would be theoretically the best thing, you could achieve a little bit higher. So that's just one example. Also, I think in the context of why Japan is helping Sri Lanka, many friends ask me, Kotaro-san, why is Japan helping Sri Lanka? For me, of course, as I mentioned, Sri Lanka was next to us in our troubled times, so we will be that. But also from the strategic thinking, Japan is an island nation and dependent upon trade because we don't have enough resources to be self-sufficient and to keep our economy floating. So we need to do trade. And also we need to do investment abroad. And for that to happen, we need a very safe sea lines of communications. We hope that goods and service will flow freely, and that will guarantee our prosperity. So thus, we are very much committed. We need to get our crude oil, mostly 90% from the Middle East. So then that will be passing through the ocean. And Sri Lanka is located at the heart of this Indian Ocean. And also, on top of that, this country is blessed because both maritime sea lines and also air, it's located so beautifully that it's very hard to get another location that can do more on both fronts. So apparently, if a place like Sri Lanka becomes unstable and will not guarantee or be helpful in this logistics, then that will also have a negative impact on Japan. So from that strategic thinking, it's obvious that Japan needs to be close, or at least try our best so that the Sri Lankan people will be stable and prospering, and rather than collapsing or going downwards. So I think that's so from our friendship, but also from strategic thinking, Japan will be committed to try in whatever means that we have to make sure that Sri Lanka will be in a good or stable situation. So this is like on Sri Lanka, but then I think briefly I'd like to touch upon a more broader global or more contemporary perspectives. So I think basically it's two things I'd like to, and one is like there are certain challenges to current existing world order. And most typically, recently we went through this COVID pandemic. And I think pandemics, unfortunately, will happen in the future. I don't think COVID will be remembered as the last pandemic that humankind has faced or will face. It will happen because if you look at how the antibiotics and how things are going, it's only natural that this will happen every now and then. So that means that whatever planning we are doing, we always have to bear in mind that one day a similar thing to COVID or even worse, or maybe luckily it might not be as negative as it was in COVID, but that might occur. So we always have to bear that in mind. And then also another man-made threat would be terrorism. This country also went through difficult times quite recently, and looking into what is happening in the Middle East these days. So it's always, we always have to bear in mind these things that happen. And on top of that, we have natural disasters, which is caused, is being enhanced due to climate change. And this country also went through a tsunami in 2004. And so these, man-made or human or natural disasters, we will have to face these challenges to the existing orders. But also, I think the global order itself is also starting to shift. And well, I joined the Foreign Service towards the end of the 90s. And that was, we regarded that as a post-Cold War era, where there was a little bit of hope that major power cooperation will happen, and somehow after the Cold War we will have a new kind of stable and peaceful international structure that will allow all countries to develop and prosper. But I think, well, it's quite unfortunate that now I would say that now we have entered, recently, the past few years, we have entered this post-Cold War, where, in a sense, this rivalry has become very big, a little bit similar to what was happening in the Cold War era, two blocks and some countries in between. And now something similar is emerging. So we have to really be mindful how to navigate our international order in this time of difficulties. And unfortunately, what is happening in Ukraine and Gaza Strip just shows how much this post-Cold War might be, bring about actual harm and also difficulties. And all of us will suffer from whatever will happen. So these challenges to the existing order are there, and we have to cope with it, and managers have to bear that in mind. But also another thing is that there are certain new developments that might shift or overwrite existing order. And most typically, it will be, I think, information communication technology, ICT, and AI and robotics. So these combined brings us both chance and challenge. For the chance, in the context of Sri Lanka, one thing that pops up is that, well, this country lacks road infrastructure and also like railway also. So even though you have, like world heritage, many world heritages in this very small area, it takes hours to move around, which is the opportunity cost is too much. So one way is to, but still work on the infrastructure, road, trains, whatever. But if human drones, I think, is right around the corner. So another 10 years or so, people might be flying in the air, with something on their head or something like that. Or, in Japan, we have this manga. It's called Doraemon, and then this robot comes from the future, and he has this what is called a tachycopter. It's like a helicopter, and you put it on your head, and then people will fly in the air. So but literally, human drones, you'll be able to do that. So if you travel from Colombo to Kandy or somewhere with that human drone, by road it will take you, I don't know, depending on what time you go, 2.5 hours to maybe 4 or 5 hours. But that you will arrive in like 10 or 15, I don't know, 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And so like a country like Sri Lanka, might be able to benefit from this, this radical technological improvement and innovation. Also Japan, for Japan, we are also an island country, and we are kind of narrow. We are long but narrow, so this will also help us. And the middle of our country is mountains. So we were making tunnels to get through, and we are very good at it. But I mean, maybe in the future we don't have to worry too much about tunnels. We can just do the human drone and go there. So this is the chance side. But rather, I'd like to pose a question at the very end. The challenge, and in my view, this AI, artificial intelligence, poses a big threat to everyone in this room. For instance, in the foreign ministry, we are trained in languages. So mine is Chinese. So English is my part-time job. And so, but then I think AI would do a much better translation than I can do. So my language skills will no longer qualify me as a professional. That's what's going to happen. It's not just language, many things that AI can do. So professionals will also be, will be challenged what we can do. So we really have to start thinking what the real value add for human beings will be left in this era of artificial intelligence. And it will be a drastic change, I think. But so I'm thinking of it a lot and reading and speaking with people a lot on this. Just to throw the ball at you is unfair. So, for instance, one thing I'm looking into is how the citizens in ancient Athens how they were doing, because basically in those days economic activity was left to the slaves to do. So they didn't have to work to earn or to deal with economic activities. So what they were doing was basically politics, and then they were doing a lot of enjoying life, so drinking and going bathing and whatever. So I don't know, but why I'm trying to look into it is that it might give us a little bit of thought on what, if all the economic activity, including using the brain, will be done by AI or robots or whatever, then what will be really left for us? And this will be a really, really tough time. And I think it's, and also for all the managers here. So my final word would be, so I think managers will not have the luxury to be complacent. And I hope you will, with all this complexity that I have laid out here, you'll be able to bear that in mind and to guide your staff and your people for a better future. So thank you very much for your kind attention.